We are live, Mayor Rochford.
Hey, thank you very much, Mr. Trottier. And Madame Hanselman, are there any resolutions coming out of our meeting, our special in-camera meeting? You are in mute.
Sorry about that. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Champagne, Deputy Mayor Trahan. That council for the Corporation of the Municipality of East Ferris diverse special council meeting agenda item 5. Let me just D. 5D, bylaw number 2021-38 to a future council meeting.
All in favor? Thank you so much. And so a good discussion, and so an interesting project that will be moving forward in the very near future. So thank you, Council, and thank you for those that are online. Our 50 minutes seems, I think, more like 40 minutes, so appreciate your patience. We will move on to our agenda, which is, we're into item 5. A few quick words. We're going to be discussing today at the municipal office, and I would like to welcome, we will be joined by, I see, Mr. Brian Bertrand, who is our architect for the municipal office. We're also being joined by Mr. Steve Aiken, who is with Knight Piézol and has been close to the municipality for the past number of years as we have worked through a major file. And I also welcome Mr. I think it's Greg Kamaker that's there as well. And so a few quick words about the municipal office. We'll recall that it is since 2006, over 15 years. It's gone through 4 councils and 3 CAOs. I was thinking about that. Raymond Champagne started that process, and then it was John Fior, and then Jason Trottier. So, I mean, it's an incredible journey. And so we'll recall that the school St. Teresa was purchased. And when we did, we discovered there was oil on site, a contaminated soil. We spent the next 10 years in cleanup. And so when we were faced with contamination, we had to look for a new site for our municipal office. And we looked at our current site where we are now at in Port-Beal. And that site itself was very challenging too, because it's a 100-year floodplain. So we did design some plans, and because of all of the issues related to the floodplain, it came out to be too expensive. But at the same time, we were, as a council, we were delighted that we were able to settle on the matter of the oil spill. We settled on behalf of the municipality this past summer for 2.6, or this past spring, $2.6 million. And then we were also told that the site is good to proceed and to look at redevelopment. And so today we will hear about that. But certainly for us, and I would like again here to thank Councillor Champagne in particular, as we've gone back to what was the original site planned for our municipal office, it did allow us to identify some cost savings. We're able to use the same boiler that's in the current school, at the same septic, the same water well, parking lot. So some savings now that have been very important to us as we are a lean and mean municipality. And so I think all in all, this has been a good process. And so delighted by today. It's been a long journey, and glad that we're able to come together today for this discussion. So I turn it over to our CAO because he will introduce that there's 3 parts to this presentation. And so I will let him guide us through.
Rochford, and I know on the agenda we've got Steve Aiken on first, but I think it'd be more appropriate to have Brian kind of discuss the council how we went from our current site to looking at the municipal office, going to the former St. Teresa site, and then some of the process that the tendering process, as we've remained with Kenelex Construction Company as they were the lowest bidder when we had first tendered it. So I'll let Brian bring you through that process with Kenelex and how we've come to a price that we've received so far. So I think that'll be about that. And then in moving the municipal office to the former St. Teresa site, because it's a contaminated site and we do have a remedial action plan in place as well as an order with the Ministry of the Environment, we do need somewhat, not an approval, but I guess a blessing in some way of saying, we want to move the building there, what needs to be done to satisfy the requirements and get us going basically. And that's what Steve is here today to help us out with. And then we've got Greg Kamaker, our project manager, who's in for any other questions that may not be part of Brian or Steve's purview. So I'll let Brian take it away if that's good with council.
So Thank you very much, Jason and Mayor Rushmore. And hello, everyone. I believe I've met everyone before on several occasions. It's I see faces once again, a couple of new faces as well. So I'm going to try and share my screen if you'll let me know if it's working.
I can do, Brian, is I can make you the host and you'll be able to share your screen.
If you could, please, that would be great.
Okay,
Try
so you
that.
are now the host.
Okay, so let me start with oh. That's just a current email going out. The joys of computers. I had this all set up in previously. Well, let me start with this one. So that's the St. Teresa's.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Zoom as a
What are you trying to do? What are you
going
trying
from
to
bed where I had this all set up in terms of everything pulled up, ready to go. So let me just try and at least go back to, okay.
Sure.
So all right, let me start over and see if I can. Nada. Okay, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to speak to the issues rather than have graphics or images, if that's okay with everyone. You may or may not have seen all of this information, but so starting with site selection, I was requested to attend a meeting with Pauline and Rick some time ago to look at various options and Jason, after much discussion, the suggestion came forward that we look at it fairly dispassionately and from a high level as to what the options were with each site, both from area, could the building physically fit on the site, did it have sufficient space for parking, what the costs were, the environmental concerns, adjacencies, access to roadways. So long story short, we looked at a number of sites, or 10 sites from memory, and several rose to the top. Some were not compatible, not possible at all. And in the end, the school site rose to this top because of cost, in that the municipality owned it, had a lot of data and information on it. So at the end of the day, we did a really, really rough, high level cut and paste, just to physically see if a square for a municipal building could fit on the site, as well as parking, which it did. So we were asked to then proceed to take a look at a preliminary design. And as Jason had mentioned, to connect with Kenelex to find out the potential based on some planning and a reduced footprint, what the cost would be, having a budget of $4 million, the direction given to us, and looking at it from a construction management process, which means that they would act as your agent, go out to tender to local sub-trades and those further afield, and try and achieve as close as they could to the budget, to get a stab at it based on the revised footprint. The footprint was vetted through Jason and a couple of the people at the municipality. We did not go through the entire design process, the formality that we had done before, since a lot of it could be reused. A lot of the areas were reused, the office layouts, the kitchen layouts, and we actually cut out some of the future growth areas, kept some of them in, and along with that added a flex space for council meetings to hold approximately 25 to 30 people. So on that basis, with a reduced footprint, smaller than the area that you had previously looked at, we put that out to Kenelex for costing. They came back with a price of $4,088,000 was their base price, and that included actually creating a new parking lot adjacent to property with some a paved parking lot with some sidewalks, which was I thought quite reasonable based on what they had to work with, the information that they had, and they provided a complete breakdown of all of the costs that they received from all the sub-trades. So it's totally open book as a starting point. And from that, we then connected with Steve Aiken from Make Peacehold, and included in their price, not only of the parking lot, which is an option whether to keep it paved or leave it, remove the paving. They also had included in their price 1.8 meters, approximately 6 feet of removal of soils to be removed. So that's also included in the price below the building, and approximately 450 millimeters, 16 to 18 inches of granular material below the parking lot. So, so that sort of has brought us to where we are. I know that we had sent to Jason the most current drawings, progress prints yesterday, which I believe he circulated to everyone. And that's what I was hoping to pull up. Jason, I don't know, as administrator, if you can pull those up. That might be the simplest.
So two things, Brian. I didn't send it to council yesterday because I figured we'd bring up the one drawing today.
Yeah.
They are progress, so we're not quite the construction drawings, but
Yep.
if you make me the host, I can then take over and bring those up.
Okay.
So, okay. And I believe on the upper right-hand side of my square in the 3 dots, you can make me the host.
You're getting good at this, Brian.
Oh dear. The top left, it just says live on YouTube. Bottom, that was the.
Brian, go
Yes.
to Jason's picture.
Yep.
Yeah.
The little rectangle, go to the top right
There's the
corner
3
of
dots.
his picture.
Okay, there they
Yeah.
are.
Okay.
And mute, stop video chat. Spotlight, allowed to record, allow, remove. No,
It should be just make me the host.
it's not there.
Okay.
Maybe you were already.
If you go under participants and you press Jason's name under more will come up. If you go at the bottom, participants.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and Jason's name is there on the right.
It just says.
If you
Okay,
press
there we go.
participant,
Yep.
press on
Okay.
participant, you'll see Jason's name. Then you'll see
Yep.
more if you move over.
Yes.
Press on more, and you just
Stop video spotlight. Make host. Correct.
okay. Yeah,
Perfect.
Thank you, Pauline.
it varies so many.
I deal with Microsoft project day in, day out, so it's Microsoft Teams.
So Brian,
Jason,
yeah,
you're
which drawing would you like me to put up? Which page, Brian?
if you pull up the page with the main floor plan, please.
Sure. There we go. How is that, Brian?
I can see it in the background. So is everyone able to see the floor plan?
Yes.
Okay, so at a high level, we can flip around, and I don't want to consume it with tons of detail, but please feel free to ask any questions, and I can go into in any detail that you want. So if you look at the building, you will see there's at the bottom, which is project south and also faces south, is a main entrance vestibule. And we've designed it in such a fashion that there's multiple opportunities for access to the building. And it's moving around, Jason, I don't know. Okay, yeah, so the vestibule allows you to close off the municipal office at night in some fashion or have the council chambers open for public meetings. It has access to a universal washroom. The corridors are ceramic tile. The remainder of the building are sheet vinyl. And if you zoom out a little bit, Jason, you can see the The shape of the municipal office is very similar to what we had done before, though reduced. We have one meeting room as opposed to two. We consolidated our photocopy area and storage to the left. Admin support is still in the middle. Down the center is several of the admin support that was there before, and including offices on the sides. At the very north side of the building is CAO's office, fire chiefs, and to the right off of the corridor, we have a back entry vestibule, which allows staff to park also on the north side and enter. And in between the two are the staff washrooms, file room. So that provides direct access from the municipal office in kind of a secure corridor. You'll see in corridor 112, right beside the kitchen, there's a door of convenience that can be locked off just down below. That's correct right there. So that allows actually to close off the lunchroom, kitchenette, and council chambers if there was a meetings for council to retire, to use the lunchroom both in camera or other uses. So for hosting a meeting or a meal before council meetings, etc. So we've managed to, I think, capture and reuse all of the work that was done before and squeezed it down substantially to remove absolutely any excess or future growth, with the exception of a few future positions, and you can see them listed there. So any questions? You'll see the building is connected to the existing building to take advantage of the boiler and the mechanical room. We've got a new small mechanical room and a storage area for our chairs and whatnot off the council chambers to make that a completely flex hall and flex area as well. So any questions at all with regards to the plan?
Hey, Brian, I actually have a question. I'm not even in the council, but I'm going to ask anyway. If you're doing presentations in the council chamber, where would those presentations be? Like if you're doing a slideshow?
We've not arrived at that detail, but traditionally there's the back wall to project over behind council, and or depending on how you're going to present. Current state of the art, you might be presenting on television screens, again with what's happened now with Zoom and everything else. There might be multiple screens within that space as compared to the traditional and conventional. That detail has not been worked out, but there's a multitude of options. We can project on the wall, we can project on televisions, we can, and that would be great to have your input at that point to see what works for everyone.
Thanks.
So the next,
I think Deputy Mayor, I see Deputy Mayor Trana speaking, but you're on mute. Yeah, okay.
It's all one level, correct? There's no stairs?
Yes, no, good point. Good question. There are no stairs. It's at grade, totally accessible, meets all OADA requirements.
And what's the seat capacity of the chamber?
On the council chambers, if you do a physical count, I think we counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2,
25 public and 7 council members, including 2 staff. So 2 staff, 5 council members, 25 members of the public.
And that's being quite generous to allow lots of space. I think you could probably get one more row in of public in there if you put something up against the back wall, or at least a certain component. But we've allowed for wheelchairs in sort of throughout there as well.
Councillor Lohi, did I hear your voice?
Yeah, I just was trying to catch up with making sure like the fire hall, that plan's just going to move over to potentially where you are now, correct? Am I understanding that right? If I missed that, let me know.
No, I'll let our CEO speak to that. Jason, a vision with the fire department?
Sure, Mayor Rochford. So the call was because we were over budget, we looked to move the project to this site, which can't accommodate a fire hall because it's too small, the site. So what would happen now is the fire hall would remain in operation at its current location where we are now. And then in the future, there's got to be a discussion with council how they want to proceed with the development of a new fire hall in Corbeil, which would either be on the site we are now or a new site.
So Jason, could you then find, we have what's called a building section. It's like a cut through the building. Can you find that page? I'm just going to speak briefly to that, and then we can look at the building exterior. So maybe it's not in this package as well.
It may have been right at the start,
It may
Brian.
not be. So, yeah, so let me, no, it's not. That's fine.
Okay.
So if you continue on to the reflected ceiling plan, that one right there, if you stop there. So this is a plan looking up the ceiling, the intent, and what we did, again, to look to the economical, but I think add some value. The building is actually a wood frame. Because of its size, we're able to use combustible material. So it's a wood structure, conventional exterior wood framed walls. We are using wood eye joists across and down grid lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are glulam columns and glulam beams. So the wood eyes are supported on those and are all exposed. We plan to paint out the wood eyes and the plywood deck, but leave some of the wood components exposed, which I think will add a lot of character and really open up the space. So the roof is what's considered a single ply membrane roof, and it has roof drains on it that we're going to taper the insulation. So we've kept the roof exactly flat, tapered the insulation to a multitude of roof drains, and the foundation for the entire building is what's called a floating raft slab. It's a thickened slab, approximately a foot deep, with thickened edges, and there's some major benefits to doing so. Steve can possibly talk to by not having compartmentalized conventional strip footings to allow any contaminants or anything through the soils not to be compartmentalized or trapped. So if you could go to the elevations, Jason. So if you could zoom out a bit. So you will see on the very bottom part is the south elevation. On the lower part, that is what is considered the front of the building. As you would enter, you can see there's the main entrance doors in the middle with a canopy over the top, and windows that open right through into the front reception, right through the building. On the right-hand side is actually the council chambers, but what we've done to be creative, we have a glass, it's like a curtain wall system, but the upper panels are all insulated, so it's actually false panels, but just one row of glazing across the front. So it allows light into it, but it gives it some character, and it offsets. We have the opportunity to add some real color to the building with different shades of metal type siding. We've got preformed metal panels. We've got vertical and horizontal metal siding. We can make them wood grain. We can make them different finishes, different colors. So there's lots of opportunities there. And it will also if you zoom out a bit, Jason, it also ties into the aesthetic of the existing school, which has a very modernist vibe. Very, it's 1970s, but the design of your current building is quite current by way of design, but it does tie into, we can match the colors and have it look as though it's always been there, or very close to tying the aesthetics into it as well.
Did you want to know the page now, Brian?
I think unless anyone likes other details, I mean, we can go through everything, but any specific questions? Is there anything anybody would like to see or hear about specifically?
No, everything looks good. Everything looks good, Brian.
Councillor Champagne, thank you so much. And I think Deputy Mayor Trahan had his hand up as well.
Just a simple, I might be a little ahead of myself, but I just a great design. Everything looks good. How about for power generation, or if the power goes out, is that being thought of? And also, where was the air conditioning? Was that in your mechanical, or is that out going on the roof, or is that outside?
Yeah. So two questions there. First, there is a backup generator, I believe, included in that price for the facility, which we're quite pleased to see. And also there are rooftop units, which in conjunction with the boiler that is in your existing mechanical plant. So there, the building is air conditioned.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay.
Wait, Mr. Trottier, wait.
I just want to point out one thing, Mayor Rochford, as well, is that when we looked at the size of the council chambers, we wanted to ensure that the capacity was enough to host any training that the fire department would require. They
Thank you.
are approximately 30 members or less. So the idea was that instead of having to utilize a Coral Park Hall or, fire bays, they could just book the facility at the main office and they'd have access to come and do any training. So that was one thing we want to ensure enough capacity for our own needs, right? The fire department. So.
Right, c'est bon. Thank you for adding that. Yes, it's important.
So just from a high level costing, the site work involved is about 577,000. It was 140,000 of concrete, about 400,000 of rough carpentry, 12 of finished carpentry, and 114 of miscellaneous, which got you to about 1.2 million. That's sort of the general component. All the sub trades represented about $2 million. And then when you added your bonding, which was the same coverage as your original project, the building permit we assumed was zero. Liability and all risk insurance brought us to 3.7 million. And then there was overhead and profit from the general contractor. So that brought us to $4,088,768. But Jason has this complete breakdown, etc. Now, what we had orchestrated on your behalf with Kenelex, that this be a totally open book process. And so they have provided their high-level breakdowns as well as all of their major subcontractors, their pricing directly from them. So you have access to all that information. And we had recommended or recommending that you utilize CCDC 5B, which is a construction management process. So there are several CCDC 2, CCDC up to CCDC 14. There's all these different methodologies. This one particular methodology is pretty flexible in that they act as your construction manager. You, in advance, confirm what you're going to pay for them for their hourly wage and their profit in advance. They go through in an open book tendered situation as they've started and can continue to do so until you're comfortable with the price that is provided, at which point they then turn that into a guaranteed maximum price. So the price then becomes fixed, so it does not remain open-ended. When we received this first price of $4,088,000, we recommended to the municipality to carry a contingency as well as a few other items for unknown, specifically the soils. And after we had our meeting with Stephen, it's obvious that we have to probably double the area of removals under the building for granular material down to about 3.2 meters. We're currently included in the price is an amount of 1.8 meters. And so that's why we'd recommended you carry a contingency as well. So Jason, I believe, has carried a contingency as well as a number of other things to handle all of these, any unknowns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bertrand. And are there any other questions with respect to design before we move on to Mr. Aiken? Oui, Councillor Champagne?
Question, Brian. So basically, this is not basically a tender. This is basically a profit contract, basically, then, right? It's basically. Pardon me.
I'm sorry, I didn't enter the first. Not a.
This is not a tender. This is not a tender. Basically, this is a. How would it work? Because you're talking about a different avenue that it's going.
So a conventional is what they typically we've spoken of, like CCDC 2, which is a stipulated sum. Right. You spend your time, you document, you put it out to the market, and in turn they tend to come back. You choose the lowest price because you pre-qualified, and it's a stipulated sum. It's a fixed price. This they have gone to all the market based on preliminary drawings, similar to what you've seen, and they've obtained pricing. So, and they've provided you with open book for all the pricing they've received back. So it doesn't mean that they can not continue to refine what they're doing or investigate others, but it's a page marker based on the original information for that price.
Yeah, so
When
it's
you
not a lump-
arrive,
It's not a lump sum then.
well, if you wanted to today fix that and make it a guaranteed maximum or a lump sum, you could.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Mr. Tracy, we turn it back to you.
Just one thing I wanted to bring up, Mayor Rochford, maybe Brian can help me out with this one, is that we've got the price down from Kenelex. What we're waiting for is a bit of a price on how much it will cost to go from 1.8 meters to 3.2 meters for excavation. Now, I believe we're looking to get that number by, I believe it's Monday, Brian?
Yes, we should. Well, there's two things. We sent the drawings to Steve. First, we sent PDFs and then we sent CAD, which I think he's received. He's going to do some volume calculations. Once he has the volume calculations, in turn, we've also received from the structural engineer, which I forwarded to everyone today, the bearing capacity that they require. So once Steve provides that volume, we'll send it to Kenelex, and based on the information they have, we'll be able to get a firm number from him for that unknown.
Thank you.
Jason, quick question. I thought that the municipality was doing their own excavation.
Well, Councilor Champagne, there has been a discussion about that, and it's still open to discussion. The problem being now is how deep we need to dig. Does our equipment allow us to go that deep? Our excavator, basically, right? Another thing to look at is we've got trucks. They're not triaxles, they're tandems. So does it make sense for us to do it and take longer time than hiring someone that's got the proper equipment, basically, right? So yes, we are able to try to reduce some of the cost with that. Another thing to remember is that if our 3 trucks are on this job for just say, I don't know how long it would take, Brian, a week or 2, we also cannot be doing any other work with our trucks. Like they're pretty much called for on this project, and I'll let Brian add to it.
Yeah, so thanks, Jason. That's exactly right. We did have the discussion, Rick. Kenelex said, and they talked about the size of their equipment. They've got some massive excavators, massive trucks, but they said they're totally open. They can carry your municipality to do component of the work or whatever amount you want, and they'll charge it back. So at least it'll be under their umbrella. You have one contractor on the site as opposed to, yourselves as well as them. But they said they gladly work with you. Whatever you want to do, use your equipment and charge it back. But in combination with theirs, they have the ability to speed things up dramatically.
Yep.
And Steve, you may want to add. Steve, you were there at the meeting. Maybe if there's something else you want to add, especially because you talked about what was required for remediation at the same time, right? Having large buckets and having to stop. So I don't know if you want to.
And I believe the trucks have to have licenses, ministry approved licenses to haul the material away as well, Rick.
Correct, Rick.
I realize that, but the municipality doesn't need it because it's their own material and their own property.
Yeah, that's what we're looking into. So,
Mr. Aiken, thank you, Mr. Commacker as well. So, Mr. Aiken, I think your turn.
Okay. So because this property is part of that order with the ministry, we thought it was prudent to talk to the ministry in advance to confirm if they have any issue or concern with going forward with this work. I mean, originally the idea of building the office on this location back in 2015, when it was first brought up with myself, after the discovery of the fuel oil from the underground tanks, we had advised that it wasn't a good idea. Since that time, there's been a significant amount of investigation, some remediation downstream of the area. And so when the question was asked again recently in the last probably 6 months or so, the answer was, I think you can do it now because we understand the problem. We know what was the origin. We know where things moved. So, building in that location can be done. Talking to the ministry, they didn't disagree with that. They were on board with the idea. They thought it was also a good method to also assist in additional remediation of the site. To build this building, your best option is to remediate the soil below the location. and remove, what quantity you can of the fuel oil that remains in the ground in that area. In recent history, in the last 6 months, there was still free product in very thin amount in roughly the same location as where the fuel tanks were located, and just slightly downstream towards the road, towards Corbeil Road. And there is obviously some residual fuel oil within the soil and also within the groundwater in the area. So we talked about remediation prior to building, and then there's also mitigation. So the remediation would be essentially, in simple terms, is a dig and dump. Dig up the soil that's contaminated, pump out the water that comes in that's contaminated, and take the soil to the landfill where you're going to need it anyway for cover in the long term. You've already done that for the trenching that's been done in the park and also at the senior villa over the years. And so the township is very aware of how to manage that soil at site. I believe Antoine, who's not on this call, he has a location for this material to go to at the landfill. And then the groundwater seepage that comes in would be managed through the same sort of process we did before, where we would have a company like Wags Petroleum come in, provide some large size tanks that you could dewater into, so you manage your water. You'd have to manage water with regards to any excavation, except this excavation would be deeper than your typical excavation for a building. As Brian said, 1.8 meters, I think was the excavation depth for the building. We know that the water table has gone down as low as 3.2, 3.3 meters below ground surface. As of yesterday, the water table was around 3 meters based on some measurements we took yesterday. So we know that the hydrocarbons from those tanks, have contaminated a zone, from the highest water level marks, which is probably close to the 1.5 meter level, down towards the 3.2, 3.3 meter level. So that soil in that area would be, smeared with fuel oil over the years. The only way to get rid of that is to excavate it out. And since you're already excavating 1.8 meters, you have to go down to 3.2. That's an extra 1.4 meters. It's the right thing to do. It reduces the risk down the road. If you don't do that, the ministry, the ministry has a process that may or may not apply to this, and I don't think it does apply to this, but record of site condition. Record of site condition is typically only needed when you're changing a use of a property to a more sensitive use, and you need a change in your I guess, use of the property from the township. My understanding in this case, there is no change of use. It's going to be a council chamber, which is going to, the same zoning or use that you have for the property will be utilized. It would be the same. So there's technically no need for the record of site condition. When the ministry was asked about that, they advised strongly to do one if you can, because if the ministry signs off on a record of site condition at the end of the day, they are taking the responsibility or liability essentially for accepting that. So long-term risks are gone because the ministry is now responsible. Because if they accept it, then they are saying, hey, it's good to use for that use. If you can do a record of, there's different levels of record of site condition that you can do for a property. You can do a very simple tier 1 record of site condition, which is essentially you do what you do, you dig up the site, you remove everything, we test the soil, we test everything. You got soil conditions that basically are close to or meet the guidelines that are out there under Reg 15304, which is a regulation in province of Ontario for contaminated sites. If you meet that, then it's a 1 month turnaround basically, and the ministry will be fine. I don't think you're going to get every piece of contaminated soil or groundwater off the property by digging up where the building is, because we do know that there's likely some residual that has gone below the school building, and that will also be outside of the footprint of the building itself, downstream within the rest of the property. So technically you don't need a record of site condition. It's just something that you guys can look at, and if it makes sense to do so, I think it'd be good to do. but you don't need to. Okay. But what we're recommending is excavate out the area. When you're doing the footprint, of course, you're taking out more soil than you need because you also need to consider the walls and the slopes of those to have a safe excavation to do the work. We need to get into the excavation to get samples from the floor and the walls of the excavation to basically provide a report that provides the township with, here's the data that shows what conditions you have remaining at the building. We've also recommended that where the old septic tank was that was removed in 2013, that tank fed an old septic field, which goes under part of the parking lot right now. So we have a monitoring well out there. It's called MW 1610. It's right sort of central in the parking lot. There's, I think, 3 monitoring wells through the parking lot. There has been free product in that well as late as last year. So that septic bed obviously got fed some fuel oil over the years from the water table going up and down, affecting the septic tank, back before it was removed in 2013. So we're recommending that that part of that parking lot be excavated as well, down to a depth. It may not have to go down 3.2, but it could. But it's a smaller area than what the building would be, to remove any upstream fuel oil impacts from the area. The thinking about it yesterday, there is options that, if in a perfect world, you would excavate the upstream part first before you actually excavate the building. Where the building is, the top 1.5 meters, that fill can likely get used as backfill for where the parking lot excavation was. So you're not having to bring in new fill. You can utilize existing fill for another part of the property, so that you're not spending more money than necessary. You don't have to truck as far or anything else. So there's one way to sort of handle that extra excavation a bit. It's prudent to do that excavation because there's no point in cleaning something up and then having all this fuel oil contamination upstream that eventually will just creep its way back through underneath the building. So that's why we recommend doing that. The other thing that we're looking at doing is a mitigation. So after you've done all this excavation, you've backfilled it with good fill for the structural guys to do the foundation for this floating slab. We would like to then, okay, what are you going to do with regards to soil vapors if there's anything ever happening in the future? I think most of you guys are aware there's soil vapor sampling happening on the project for the last few years. There's a concern over at the senior villa that if vapors got through the senior villa property into the building, that would be an issue. So the way to mitigate that is by putting a system in place when you're building the building below the floor to basically provide a barrier. And so the simplest way to think of that is basically take a liner type material and it's put down first, and then the slab goes on top of it. So it provides a seal. And there may, depending on the requirements, you may even consider some sort of passive or active ventilation of the soil below the building. We've gone out to a specialist engineering company called Geosyntec out of Guelph and Kitchener that are going to provide that design aspect for the building. And I think, Brian, you've sent them information on that too. So that's the other sort of conservative approach here, is to make sure you've got that mitigation strategy in place so that you don't worry about vapors ever getting into your building. When I was talking to the engineer of that company, they also said, don't forget all the utilities that come through the floor of your building that need to also get sealed. So when your plumbing fixtures, how power, et cetera, comes in, they will also provide the design that's needed to make sure those are sealed properly so you don't get vapor sneaking through. So that's a lot of information. I think, but at the end of the day, if you do all that, you guys should have a safe building that will, for the long term, not become an issue with regards to the hydrocarbon spill that happened at that property prior to 2012. Rick. Oh, Pauline?
Councillor Champagne?
Question, Steve. When you say you go down 3.2 meters, you stop at bedrock though, right? You don't have to break rock. You just go loose material.
Yeah, there is the bedrock there. So I looked at the bedrock. We have some information on bedrock, Rick, down around 8 meters. The bedrock depth at the well is 36 feet based on the well log. So the bedrock doesn't seem to be that close to surface right in that area.
Yeah.
So, you know, you never know. I mean, not every spot has a hole in it, but yeah, we wouldn't go into the bedrock.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Bon, oui, Deputy Mayor Callahan, you're on mute.
Steve, you kind of got me a little twisted when you were saying about the record of the site completion, about going deeper and but you don't have to. But to put you on the spot, what's your recommendation?
Okay, my recommendation is you do the excavation as outlined in the mitigation. And if we find that we can excavate the majority of the contaminants and sort of clean up the site, if you want to call it that, as much as possible, I would recommend doing the tier 1 record of site condition, which is a very short turnaround with regards to the ministry and approving. It's like a 1-month review time. And that would then give you a ministry assurance about the work and about your property. If we can't get the soil completely remediated the way we'd like, Steve, then we would avoid the record of site condition process, because if you go to a tier 2 or a tier 3, as they call it, process, it's a 1 to 3 year sort of timeline for the ministry to get back. And that would just be, you know, not fitting anybody's timelines. The requirement is that, because you're not changing the use, this is municipal property as well. You technically don't have to do a record of site condition. I mean, even if this was a private property, if you didn't change the use to a more sensitive, say like putting, you know, a house there or a daycare facility or something like that, then you wouldn't need to do a record of site condition anyway. So, I mean, you're not changing the use. You're actually keeping it as a day use only type building. You know, it's adults primarily. You know, you're not going to be living in the building, you know, unless you got a lot of work to get done and you have to do an all-nighter or something. But, you know, you're not going to have that issue. And then, so I think I would only do the record site condition if we can sort of guarantee that we're going to do the simple process. And the only benefit of that is you get that MECP guarantee sort of thing. Yeah,
I agree with you on that. And I also, just thinking too, is probably for insurance purposes too, down the road, there would probably, I would imagine there'd be some questions there also, right?
Yeah, I don't know about the insurance. I mean, that's probably more up Jason's alley than mine, but
I just wanted out there, just like after the fact, our insurance carrier would probably want to see something, right? So knowing that there was some, you know, risk there, right? So
well, and that's why, Steve, we're trying to mitigate this risk as much as possible. So the remediation and then putting the liner as well below the building, you're doing significant amount of mitigation, and I'm sure the building in today's code, Brian, will have great ventilation systems, you know, in place, so your air circulation is going to be, you know, better than you have probably now. And so you throw all that together, and you've got a way better. You've got a lot of you've lowered your risk dramatically.
So last question, and it's just more for myself. What's the warranty on that liner?
That's a good question. I'll leave it up to the other engineer to figure out. We've done liners for mining related projects, and you know, no liner is guaranteed to last forever. But for environmental situations like this, you know, typically it depends on the size, the thickness of your liner, et cetera, and the type of material. If we go with an HDPE versus an LDPE, different types of liners, they can last up to about 100 years.
Okay.
So your building will you'll probably have a new building by then.
Necessarily.
Also, they may not need the liner. They may be able to pipe and vent out with a fan. As Steve was mentioning, they're still designing it, so potentially a liner may not even be needed. It'd just be piping with a fan vent. They do a flow rate. So
yeah, and the piping system's easy. It's like a septic field.
Now we do require some form of vapor barrier. underneath or
Anyway.
woven into our slab to meet the Ontario Building Code. And we've done, it may not be to the extent of that, but we've done some pretty heavy duty liners from an architectural perspective that are taped and are almost rubberized. And we did at the hospital, North Bay Regional Health Center, for example, and we tape it to any penetrations coming through. Probably very similar to what Steve's talking about. So we still require some form of vapor barrier underneath there that will help also mitigate what's happening.
Yeah, we had talked about that already, to make sure it was part of that process.
Yeah.
Other questions before we proceed?
And
We
just
go-
one, just to follow up, you had asked as well about the generator. In the price for mechanical electrical of $898,000 is included. There's an allowance of $125,000 for a 130 kilowatt propane generator, complete with sound attenuation, waterproof enclosure, and a standard 400 amp automatic transfer switch. So that, yes, was included.
Mhm. Certainly for me today, I find that over the years that as a council, because of the matter of contamination at the St. Teresa site, we've had a number of discussions with Steve Aiken and other professionals. And so for us, we, as was mentioned, we have gotten to know the problem and understand it. And today, I don't believe we've had many of these sessions and discussions in an open setting as we have an open meeting format as we have today. So if I may just ask in general, both from Mr. Beltran, Mr. Aiken, cleaning up a brownfield site is not a new situation. I mean, you have been through these matters before. And so in that sense, if you could give maybe some assurance that from a municipal perspective, that the municipality is going in a good direction. And I heard those statements, but if you could just maybe position them a bit more strongly.
Sure. So, you've got, the history of the site. There was underground tanks that leaked for years and years there, creating a significant volume of fuel that's reported to the park, across the highway to the senior villa property. By doing this remediation where you're building the building, you are going to be essentially removing the source of any further impacts downstream. So it will, in the long term, benefit the downstream environment as well. So that's why it's a good thing, number one. Doing a dig and dump, that's the simplest technology out there to remediate a site. Hydrocarbons are lighter than water, so the great thing about that is you're not worrying about the hydrocarbons getting deeper than past the water table. So that makes it, a simpler dig and dump than if you're, say, dealing with dry cleaner fluids that do the exact opposite. They would end up sitting on the bedrock and not on the water table, right? So this is a relatively straightforward. The other thing, it's fuel oil. So safety wise, it's not as bad as, say, a gas station where there's gasoline. The guy operating the excavator doesn't have to worry necessarily as much about explosions, but from sparks from an excavator on a rock, because fuel oil is not that volatile relative to gasoline. We do have soil vapor reports for those guys that are interested. There is methane. So the methane is high level in some locations right near the school where the tanks were. So that's the only precaution, is when doing the excavation, we'd have to be careful that we don't ignore the vapors that are going to be coming into the excavation. So there will be a safety plan in place for operators and workers within the trench area, as we've done in the past for the other work at the 2 trenches in the park, as well as the trench over at the St. Teresa property. We'll monitor and take samples of the air quality and advise workers if it's too high, and advise when it's safe to do so again, because sometimes you hit pockets of hydrocarbons that can be quite concentrated, and the levels of hydrocarbons can be not good for your health. And so you're best to stop, let it air out, and then proceed after we've shown that it's fine. And so we have meters and sampling equipment to do that. So we would excavate out as deep as necessary, Pauline. I think we're saying 3.2 meters. There is absolutely no guarantee how deep we'll have to go, but we'll go as deep as we need to get rid of the contaminated soil. If it gets excessively crazy, then we will obviously sit down and have a discussion before proceeding further, because the deeper it gets, which I don't expect it to be much deeper than the 3.2 to 3.4 meter depth sort of thing, you know, it becomes sort of, is it really necessary to do that? Because it's the likelihood of it impacting on your building is going to be very, very well reduced. You're going to get the majority of your fuel out in that location. We have to be careful when working around the school that we don't jeopardize the footings and the foundation of the school. So we do know that the school sits on a footing system that's probably in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 feet deep. So you can excavate pretty close to vertical near the school building until that depth, and then you have to be careful, and then you start excavating on an angle away from the building to save the foundation. We would also probably take some samples below the foundation in areas where we think there might be a problem with the school to understand those conditions. But in general, shouldn't be a problem. We've also are testing the well right now at the school as well. So yesterday we were out there, we did a simple test to see if running that well for a period of time would result in any impacts to the water quality and or affect the wells and the overburden in the area. So the good news is we ran that for about 8 hours and the water level didn't change in the overburden wells that are on the property. The water level in the well went down significantly by about 10 meters, but stayed at that depth for the entire length of running the hose. Basically, we just took the outside hose and ran it for 8 hours straight. And then we took a sample of that water at the end of the day, and we'll see what that water quality is like. That well's 545 feet deep. Bedrock's at 36 feet. The casing's 42 feet. So it should be fine because the casing's sealed into the bedrock. So it should be fine. But we wanted to make sure that before you guys start doing too much out there, we test this well, because that's your water supply for the property. And we didn't want to, you know, oh, surprise, surprise, you need a new well. Now your excavation for the building is fairly close. We staked out the perimeter of the building over there. So it's marked in chalk right now and some stakes at the corners. So you can get a sense of where it is. So the northwest corner of the building is probably about 3.5, 4 meters from the well, and it's direct in line with the well. So it should be fine for that. I don't think we're going to get as much contaminated soils either, Pauline, towards the north of the property as we do down to where the tanks were. I think we might, hopefully, only have to excavate the depth that's needed for Brian's requirements for the foundation, and that's it, up closer to that end of the property, end of the building. But as we go close to where the tanks were in that area, we know that it's going to have to go down to the full 3.2.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aiken. You are an outstanding professional. We've had great support working together with you over the years, and so it's very good that you're involved with this project. So thank you, and I turn it over to Mr. Bertin for overall final comments before we move it back to our CAO.
So thank you very much, Mayor Rushford, and pretty pleased Steve's involved in the project as well. We, from brownfield sites, we work currently working on several, have had some successful completion. If you think of North Bay, for example, the Hands building that our office completed a few years ago, there's a hotel down now on the waterfront that's all contaminated soils. I'm working on several others as we speak, but we rely on the soils engineers to give us direction and their expertise. And then from a certain point up, we're involved and it's an integral process. You look at all of the old rail lands in the city of Toronto, and from a philosophical perspective, they don't make any more land. The most valuable lands, as we developed as a nation, had rail lands on them. So it's becoming commonplace that we're now developing on brownfield sites and have great technologies to remediate and do so. So it is becoming commonplace, maybe new to the municipality, but it's not new to us, and it's certainly not new to Stephen as well. But we would recommend, based on what Steve had proposed, to carry the volumes to excavate the 3.2 meters across the entire site, to give you an upset worst case scenario that we would be drawing from your contingency at this point in time, but also obtain some unit rates plus and minuses, so that as we actually go through the site, we have our worst case scenario And if there's less to be excavated, we just delete from that. So we're not, we're moving in a positive direction in terms of cost as opposed to, in a negative fashion. So, but I don't know what Steve thought, but we take the entire volume and put a unit rate to it and then have our amount set, then it gives us some flexibility on site as per the direction from Steve. At any rate, just as a closing note from my perspective, it's not too often you get to play baseball and hit a ball out of the park, but we were pretty excited when the budget numbers that we were given, we were pretty close to it when we come back to meet your requirements, and yet still, I believe, meet all of your programming requirements from a flow perspective, and as well be able to incorporate, sort of the municipal chambers areas, the flexibility of the kitchenette, public washrooms, etc. Only because of the work that you did in collectively, it's always a team effort in taking a look at the site options, right? That allowed us to piggyback on existing infrastructure, something you owned, existing monies you already spent into, upgrading the boiler and everything else. So from our perspective, I think it's a win-win. But I'm pretty pleased, and we're pretty pleased collectively to be working with the team. We have Greg and Kenelex and Jason and everyone else has put input into it. And I'm pretty pleased as to what we were able to achieve at this point. So.
Oui, Councillor Champagne, Mr. Aiken, and then we turn it over to Mrs. Trottier.
Yeah, no, having said that, Brian, even though the material that we will be excavating out of there is going to be used at the landfill site anyway, because we need material for cover anyway. So the material won't be wasted. So it'll be the cost recovery for us.
Oh, good. I didn't know that. So that's good.
C'est bon. Mr. Aiken?
Yeah, just I forgot to touch on the point, Brian, where you mentioned about the foundation type. So it's going to be a floating slab. The advantage of that is by not having basically walls going down into the ground, your footings and your foundation walls, you allow groundwater to keep flowing in the direction it always has. If for some reason you have contaminants upstream, when you put walls in, it causes the contaminants to have to go somewhere else. So by allowing the flow to continue the way it's always been is actually a benefit, because it doesn't create a problem somewhere else if for some reason we can't get everything. So it's a good thing for the project as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And so with there being no further question, we return it to you, Mr. Trottier. And I guess the question is here, today we are looking at moving item B and item C. And because there's still a slight unknown with respect to the cost for excavation, you will be looking for a maximum amount that you would be able to go to from in order to be able to cover what that additional cost would be. Is that correct?
So Mayor Rochford, there's actually maybe two unknowns. So we know right now what the price is from Kenelex, and they're going to give us just one additional price for the additional excavation, right? But then that's not end of the price for this building. Like, we got to look at other things like Steve's company's cost, the company Geosyntec that we've got, our architect. So I think we almost got to look eventually at what's the total cost we're willing to spend for the municipal office project, right? And I know we've got approval with Infrastructure Ontario for 4.8 million. So that would fully cover the project is what my assumption is, right? So today, if we wanted to proceed with a contract for Kenelex, we know there's still an amount outstanding. So we can do it two ways. We can defer the signing of a contract, or you can pass basically the bylaw authorizing an upset limit. So as long as the price comes in from Kenelex below that, then it gives me the authority to sign a contract and move ahead with Kenelex. That's that, or we can wait, or we can also pass a resolution that we intend, like provide a letter to Kenelex that we intend to sign a contract, next week or the week after, just say whenever we can call a special meeting. So it's really up to council how they want to proceed. I was somewhat expecting the price to be able to pass the contract today, but we're still waiting on that price from Kenelex. And it's not totally them. There's a couple moving parts. There's information from Steve that's got to go to Kenelex and Brian that they use then to determine a price, right? So everyone's moving as fast as they can, and we should have that price very early next week. So it's up to council how they want to proceed on this one.
So I guess three options. One is the upper limit. We provide 4.5 potentially to Monsieur Trottier, just to put a number out there. Or we say we provide a letter of intent today to Kenelex, or we wait till our meeting Tuesday night to pass. Today we could pass the financing and we could pass item C on Tuesday night. So what is council, any comments? Any comments? Councillor Champagne.
Yeah, we've been at this process a long time. How many years is it? 10 years? I think
Well,
it should be.
since 2006.
Yeah. So basically, at the end of the day, it's our property. It's going to get done one way or the other. It's just looking at the numbers of what Kenelex is going to give us. I don't think we should slow the process down. I think we should get on and go forward.
Oui, Monsieur Trottier.
Yeah, if I may just add a comment following up to Councillor Champagne, just for council's information as well, before Kenelex can get digging, there's a couple things that have to happen. We have propane tanks that need to be moved because they're in the parking lot right now. There's a hydro pole that needs to be moved. So there's a lot of work in advance to get things going to be able to start digging, right? So that's why somewhat today the direction to move with a contract would indicate to Kenelex, we are serious, we're going to get going. But then it also means now that we can move ahead with hydro, Moore's propane to move tanks, get the wheels in motion basically, but we don't want to proceed that way yet because council could decide we're not moving ahead with the project. So that's why somewhat today that discussion of an upset limit.
So if we had to have an upset limit, what would be the amount that we would 4.5, would that be an appropriate amount, Monsieur Trottier?
In looking at the values we received so far from Kenelex, I would be comfortable at around the 4.5 amount. We will know early next week. The reason I looked at that value is we know the site works was about $577,000. And we know it's not an exact double of all of that because in that value, there's light standards, there's curbs, there's sidewalks. That's not double that value. So my thoughts is we're somewhat around that amount. If it was to be above that, I would have to come to council anyway for authority to spend more than that to sign a contract, right? It just gives me the flexibility to sign a contract, get the project going without coming back to council, but I would still fill you in once the contract's done, right?
Okay. Comments on this? Basically, I guess this is the recommendation that's coming forward. Yes, Deputy Mayor Trahan?
There's all permits in, site plans, all that all in there.
Septic. Yes, I'd say so. Yes.
You say so, or do we know so?
Not in yet.
Go ahead.
So you want me now to vote on something that last thing we don't have, and we're gonna vote on something that we still don't have. You know where I'm going with this here?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Monsieur Trottier.
Yeah, so the reason for this one is we're going to have the construction ready, drawings. I mean, maybe Brian can answer that one, but the difference with this one is there's a lot of prep work and organization and work to be done before we can ever build. So I'll give an example. Even if we had a building permit for the building today, that excavation is a couple weeks worth of work, moving the propane tanks, moving the hydro pole, all of that has to be done before a building gets done in a slab. So total different scenario than our other project. That one there, if their building permit was in place, they start building actually, right? So.
Okay. That's a good question. Thank you for asking it, Deputy Mayor. So, c'est bon.
We should proceed with an upset limit. That's just my opinion. And again, everybody else has got opinions.
I just want to check with Councillor Lougheed and Councillor Kelly. If you're good to proceed with, I think the suggestion is to go with the upper limit. I see a thumbs up. Okay, thank you, Councillor Lougheed. Councillor Kelly?
I'm in favor of proceeding with both.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm fine with the upset. I'm fine with the upset limit. Yeah. And come Tuesday night, I'd like to have an upset limit on the other project as well. Let's get going. Because both of them are time sensitive and we're now into August.
So on that note, let's proceed with item B. Thank you very much, Council, for all those great comments. We're going with 5.B.
Mayor Rochford, if I may, just one comment as well. Because the property is owned by the municipality, there's no need for a site plan control agreement.
No, exactly. There's a few, your point was well made. There are some differences, and I think everyone, I think it was just a good comment. We're very anxious to move forward on all fronts, right? So if, let's put 5.B forward, then if, does Madame Deputy Clerk have the resolution for that? Financing for the new office?
Jason, was that the one you were going to do a resolution for?
So I believe we've got the bylaw ready to go for the Canalex contract, but we would have to change the wording, Carrie.
Okay.
So what I would suggest is we pass a resolution to pass a bylaw for Canalex with an upset limit of 4.5 million.
And so Jason, 5.B is the financing for the new municipal office.
Okay.
A bylaw to enter into an agreement with Infrastructure Ontario.
Okay, so is that how you'd like to proceed first?
No, it doesn't matter. It's just because it was like that on the agenda, but whichever you go, please take it in hand and go proceed.
Okay, so at this point as well, if there is no other questions for Brian, Steve, and Greg, I'm just concerned that they might have other meetings to go to. So if council has no other questions, we can let our guests leave the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a good point. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Brian,
Thank
Steve,
you,
and
everybody.
Greg. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks.
All right, have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so council, if you want to proceed first with the financing, there is a report that was included in the agenda, and I will open it up myself. And my screen is basically frozen, so I'll go ahead and speak to the matter. We approached the Royal Bank, which is our chartered bank that we deal with, as well as Infrastructure Ontario. The process started quite a while back with Infrastructure Ontario, dating back to November of 2019, when we had first started the project. And at first we had looked to secure a loan of $6 million. Since then, we know we don't require the $6 million. So the value that we knew the building would likely come between was about $4.5 to $5 million total. So in working with Infrastructure Ontario, they provided an approval of $4.8 million for the project. Just for everyone's information and the public that's watching, it's a little bit different of a process than Royal Bank because you don't get a loan, basically, you're getting a debenture. So what happens is you're able to borrow funds from Infrastructure Ontario throughout the whole construction period, which is about 0.6 or 0.65% interest. So cheap money while you're building. When you reach substantial completion or completion, you then go to Infrastructure Ontario, and instead of paying back the funds, what they do is they convert the construction funds into a debenture, and the debenture is sold on the open market to an investor. And that's why with that process, you're able to freeze the loan, I guess I would say, for the entire period. So for this one, we'd be looking at a 25-year term for the municipal office. So what happens is your rate, and the rates right now are about 2.6%, they're frozen for the entire 25-year period. So basically you go from about 0.6% to about 2.6%. RBC, they came first with an approval, and the value is about 4.4 million. The reason for the difference was I had to provide a value to Infrastructure Ontario quite some time ago because the process started a lot earlier than RBC, and that's the value that we had selected, right? So RBC came forward. They've got construction financing available for us as well. I mean, it is a higher interest rate, and let me just pull that up now that my computer screen isn't frozen. No, I'm not able to get it. But anyway, it was about 2.6%, the construction financing, I believe 2.95% for construction financing. And then what happens is when your project is done, you then get into a long-term loan. And they're allowing us up to a 10-year term, which is actually pretty good because it used to be a maximum of a 7-year term. And what basically after 10 years, we would have to renegotiate the loan like you would a mortgage, right? So 10 years from now, that 2.6% could possibly be 3, 4, 5%. We don't know what the rates are going. So that's the difference between the two processes. So today what I'm recommending to council is because this project is the more expensive project between the two priorities that we have, it only makes sense to go ahead with Infrastructure Ontario, freeze that value for 25 years and pay less interest on a 25-year loan, and then proceed with the Royal Bank eventually with the funding for our other project. So those are the two options for council today, and I'm recommending that we go with Infrastructure Ontario. What this bylaw does today is it allowed me to put an application into them. It allows the mayor and the CAO to negotiate a financing agreement, which there isn't much negotiation. It's a pretty standard financing agreement. But then it allows us to start drawing on the funds to complete the project. What happens at the end of the term when the construction's done, we then have to bring a debenture bylaw to council, and that's when we'll know the exact rate we're locking in our cost at for 25 years. I don't foresee a big increase in interest rates from now to when the project's done, which is likely in the spring. But either way, that's what the process is, and my recommendation is we enter into an agreement with Infrastructure Ontario. So if there's any questions, I can answer them.
No. Okay, we're good to proceed then with your recommendation.
I have a resolution. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Waheed and Councillor Champagne. Whereas Council for the Municipality of East Ferris deems it expedient to pass 3 readings of the following bylaw at this session, be it hereby resolved that a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement between the Corporation of the Municipality of East Ferris and Infrastructure Ontario be read a first, second, and third time, passed and numbered 2021-36, and that said bylaw be signed by the mayor and clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you so much. So now we move to item C, the bylaw to enter into an agreement with Kenelex to an upset limit of $4.5 million.
Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Trahan.
And Councillor Kelly.
Whereas, sorry, Jason, it's the same resolution we had prepared. We're just adding with an upset limit of 4.5 million. Okay. Whereas Council for the Municipality of East Ferris deems it expedient to pass 3 readings of the following bylaw at this session, be it hereby resolved that a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement between the Corporation of the Municipality of East Ferris and Kenelex Construction Company Limited with an upset limit of $4.5 million be read a first, second, and third time, passed and numbered 2021-37, and that the bylaw be signed by the mayor and clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation.
All in favor? C'est bon. Thank you so much. Carried. Okay, so thank you very much. And on that note, then we'll move directly into item D. We have deferred, and we move directly into item E. Request from Deputy Mayor Trahan to return to in-person meetings. I guess that would be if we have a meeting next week. I turn it over to you, Deputy Mayor Trahan. Yes?
Yeah, so I'll just make a comment on it, and the reason why I'm asking for that is to see if what the flavor is to go back in person meetings. I know Rick has made a comment in the past. It just makes sense. I agree with Rick. Sometimes it's easier to meet up in face to face, but on the other hand, too, I know that some people may prefer to also go back and stay in Zoom. And to kind of throw a little more of a twister in it is we don't know what's going to happen this fall either, right, gang? With COVID and everything else coming up too. So as it states here, like to return back in persons, but it's also just to see what generate a bit of a conversation to see what everybody is comfortable with too. And I know some people are comfortable doing some Zoom and at times, and some are want to maybe partake in it in person. And then we just don't know. Like I've been following what's going on in Canada with regards of the COVID and we see numbers spiking in certain areas, right? So I don't want to throw this out there on this big ask, and then, we're going back into Zoom in the fall, right? So kind of throwing it out there to see what everybody's feelings are, and we'll see bring it up. And then if everybody is okay staying where we are, that's fine. If, just kind of throwing it out on the floor here. For myself, I'll start off. I have no problem going in person, with and still going with the restrictions and following those until otherwise something changes too. So anyway, that's what I'm throwing out there, and see what everybody else is what they want to do.
Wait, Councillor Champagne.
Yeah, again, it's everybody's choice. I just feel more comfortable in person. I know there's safety aspects and everything else, but I think that our municipal, or not municipal, but the Corbeil Park Hall is plenty big. They were more than probably 6 feet apart most of the time. And if anybody does not want to do it, they can still do it on Zoom. But I think it's a lot easier for the staff and ourselves, like getting information or asking questions before and after. That's just my opinion, but I'd sooner go back to personal meetings.
No, thank you. Councillor Kelly and Councillor Lougheed.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm glad you brought it up. I think it's good. I also appreciate that you kind of opened it up in a really open way. Deputy Mayor, that's good. I just think, to me, it's less about comfort and a little bit more about, like, everything's kind of like, it would be more comfortable to do many things right now, that's for sure. But I think for me, there has to be a little bit more of a compelling argument besides comfort to return. And, I just, I think just watching the cases rise and watching everything, when we have the tools that we can still do and achieve the goal, that's where I'm standing. The ability of still being able to do this. And plus, the buildings, and, we don't know, like, the ventilation in those buildings. We know it's airborne. We know that there's some considerations to be made there, but that's just my thought. I also personally still really think the online video and having it recorded is still high up on my priority. So I would hate to see that leave in the absence of going back to in the future. Yeah, go ahead.
If I may, just to touch on that as well, Councillor Lougheed, that I believe in-person meetings should remain to council members and staff and not the general public, because at this point in time, we're still under limitations on how many people can be indoors. And when you advertise a meeting that the public can come, you have no clue in advance how many people are going to attend. So we should have probably indicated that in the resolution. But I mean, we could still communicate that by other means, our website, Facebook, that if we're in person, we would still be broadcasting via YouTube, and delegations would still happen via Zoom and YouTube, right? So it was more for—
And there were some challenges with Owl, right? There are some challenges with the Owl. I don't know, maybe that we can consider, is there a way that you can link out a mic to that Owl? Anyway, I know I'm taking it in a few directions, but I know that the public had a hard time hearing when we were using the Owl.
Okay.
Thank you.
Erica. No, it's so good, Erica. I respect your decisions, and that's cool. That's good.
Councillor Kelly?
Yes, the committee reopened the gym last week with severe restrictions, restricted hours, and maximum of 5 people at a time in the fitness center, wearing masks and taking all the protocols. The VON have contacted me, and they're anticipating going face-to-face, but not until mid to late September, simply because there seems to be a big unknown with this Delta variant with the COVID, and that's a serious issue. So I would probably stay on Zoom until September and get an idea where the variant's going, because it's safety as well for me. And I know I would much rather be face to face, but it's a matter of safety right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Mr. Tracy, would we be able to do half council? That it's not the ideal, right? Because that makes it difficult, right? Like if we had three members in the hall and 2 members on Zoom.
Not an issue.
We could do that?
Yeah, so what we've done in the past, Mayor Rochford, when we were in that situation, we used our projector so that council members can see the other council members on the screen, basically.
Deputy Mayor Trahan, Councillor Champagne, how would you feel about that if we were to be in a split situation?
I have no problem with it.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with it either, but I want to respect my other 2 councillors with their requests too, and on continue with Zoom. And I don't like to have a split. I don't think a split's actually a good enough percentage to go ahead with the ask. So
The only reason I say that, Steve, not to be
I know,
correct, a lot of times when Terry's talking, we can't hear him because Zoom, and then everybody freezes up, and it's a challenge.
yeah, no, I hear you, and I get it. I have no problem, and I just, if we had, maybe it was like, 3-1 or a little stronger, I don't want to, with just a split, I don't want to, if we want to continue with Zoom, then we'll deal with it, and then we'll see what happens maybe this fall, and let's not hope we don't get into higher cases or anything like that. I'm just trying to, feel out the air and see what everybody wants to do and everything. I just, Mayor, I don't, and Jason, I don't think a split is good enough to maybe bring everybody back. Maybe we'll wait.
But we had said we would revisit the matter in September. So, I mean, things are evolving. There's no doubt that as a public institution, we have a role to play as our country, if our province, if there's as we push for reopening. So we also have to be mindful of that context. But I don't think we're necessarily there yet. So let's keep it maybe to what we had originally agreed to, which is we will revisit in September and see the direction of matters. And it's a good discussion. I personally, I have said I'm ready to resume in person. So Councillor Champagne, I am with you 100%. But I do also want to respect the overall wish of people. And so if everyone's okay with that, we go to September to revisit.
So Monday, you're meeting in Zoom, you're not meeting in person then?
Well, see, my good comment. Anyway, we've had a little bit of jabbing here today. It's all good. On that note, let's move to our adjournment. We've been at it for 2 hours. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much, Council. Very good work by all concerned. And so I leave it now to Madam Clerk to bring us to closure.
Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Trahan and Councillor Champagne, that we do now adjourn this meeting at 3:04 p.m.
All in favor? C'est bon, thank you. And we will resume on Tuesday night. So we'll see you then by Zoom.
Take care.